We are live. Well. Welcome, everybody. Welcome back. This is Noah Randolph, teaching pastor here for Wayfarers Christian Church. And
Welcome to the Wednesday deep dive on a cold December Wednesday today.
Yeah. And it got cold really quickly, and I could definitely feel it as I was walking my dog. I normally walk my dog most nights, and it definitely dropped to the point that I was wearing a scarf and was all decked out in 3 layers of clothing. So still cold.
Do you like the cold weather, Noah?
Oh, I love the cold. I will say I love the cold. I know a lot of people that when cold hits, I think they hate it more than summer, actually. Most of the people that I've been friends with tend to prefer summer in Memphis to winter. And I am not that person. I love winter compared to summer. So, yeah. Are you in that camp?
I used to be.
Uh-huh.
I think as I'm getting older, I don't know if the cold just gets to me more. I'm just an old man. The cold gets into my bones. And I find myself not enjoying the cold as much as I used to. But I'm probably more like you. I'll take cold weather over hot weather. So
it was always the best season, at coffee shops too, because you could
the busy season.
The busy season, because everybody wanted a warm latte, and there's a lot of advent too in cold weather. There's just a lot of reflection and pausing. I feel in the summer everybody's very, let's go on vacation, and let's go do all the 50 things we couldn't do in the fall and spring semester, and this is just so busy. And when the fall and the winter seasons, people are trying to get their homework done, and they're generally a lot more reflective and meditative. And I don't know. Have you ever seen people affected by the seasons? They just act differently
for sure.
Per season,
For sure. I think it probably has a lot to do with different people's personalities. So.
Yeah.
I've definitely seen that. So remind me, what were we calling the Get to Know You segment again?
Quirky queries.
Quirky queries.
Say that 3 times fast.
We've kind of already started a little bit,
You're right, right.
Do you like winter? Do you not?
Yeah.
But you have
I've got
one for us today. What you got? As we get to know each other.
So I'm curious about this one. I don't know if I've ever asked you this one. If I have, forgive me. What would you say is a story, it can be in any medium, TV, movie, book, that you would say is told so well that you still today remember that story with emotion, or any type of it doesn't have to be emotion, just that was awesome.
It's just very memorable.
Very memorable story, something that you would say, it's the creme de la creme of good storytelling,
Right.
And I feel it would be, a fast one if you said the Bible or any story in the Bible.
Right,
so
right.
I'm going
go
to,
ahead and
I'll go ahead and say that the Bible's off the table.
So a story besides the Bible that I think is really, really well told.
Mm-hmm.
I have kind of a quirky answer, and then maybe a more serious one.
Okay.
But I do remember I always really enjoyed SpongeBob, the TV show, the cartoon. And I have distinct memories of, there's one memory in particular I remember where I sat at a Chili's table, Chili's, the restaurant, with my parents, eating some mozzarella sticks. I was probably 9 or something. And I just told them in detail every joke and component, and I spent 30 minutes retelling an entire series of SpongeBob episodes that I had just seen right before we had come to dinner. All the details, all the jokes, all the punchlines, everything in perfect detail. And I just remember my dad kind of stepping aside and being like, this is kind of crazy. After I was done, he's like, do you realize that you just from memory told me the entire plot and premise and everything of these couple episodes of SpongeBob? If you watch SpongeBob, it was the episodes where they're trying to sell chocolate, and there's the the like climactic scene everybody references all the time is where there's this guy that's like angry and he's just like chocolate, and he's like screaming and like chasing after them. It's a whole thing. That particular episode, I just told them completely from memory. So whether it's like a master or like a master course in storytelling, I don't know that I would say that, but it still sticks in my head to this day that I remembered all of the details of that SpongeBob story.
Huh.
And I still feel that way about a lot of those episodes. Adrienne, my wife, she grew up not watching any SpongeBob, and it's so funny how many times I'll have to like explain an entire plot point of an episode so that she can catch a reference that I'm trying to make at a particular point in time. So I think that's like it's funny, but I think that's like an underrated. I think the people who write SpongeBob were like really good storytellers because I still remember a lot of those details, and a lot of those stories from all of those different episodes, even like years later. And it's like a cultural thing. Like that's part of the reason the SpongeBob memes are everywhere.
Yeah,
is because like everybody knows those references.
It really
and knows those
kind of makes the 90s a bit in the early 2000s. Yeah.
Yeah. They're like just stories that everybody has. They're like quick, simple stories that everybody references. They're really funny. The memes make sense because everybody knows the stories. So I don't think they get enough credit. They're really good storytellers.
That's fair. So that's your quirky.
Yes, that's kind of my more quirky one. As far as just more impactful storytelling that really made an impact on me. I think I mentioned this in another episode before, but there's one of my favorite movies is a movie called Up in the Air with has George Clooney and Anna Kendrick in it. And it was the first time I remember watching a movie that wasn't like a blockbuster. You know, it's not like a big budget, like it's like an indie film. It has George Clooney and stuff, but it's still like a low budget indie film. So there's like no special effects, there's nothing crazy. The cinematography is really good, but there's nothing like incredible or amazing in it to draw you in. It only can draw you in through like the storytelling and how good the story is. And I just remember being immediately sucked in. And it's still one of my favorite movies to this day. I still recommend it.
What's like the plot if I'm looking at show?
It's complicated. But it's basically about George Clooney plays the main character. He's a guy that works for a particular company, and other companies, organizations will hire this company to come in and fire people. So like if your company is doing really bad and you have to let a whole bunch of people go, but you as a boss are like too much of a wimp to have that conversation with all your employees, you hire George Clooney's company. George Clooney comes in and he just like tells people they're fired. And he just does that day in and day out for years. And it's kind of about that. It's really interesting. So
I might have to go watch this.
Yeah, I recommend it. It's still one of my favorite movies. But the reason I thought it was such a good story is because it relies purely on storytelling and character and plot and dialogue. And it doesn't have any like big budget blockbuster stuff to keep your interest. And I've always really enjoyed that. I thought that was really cool, especially in movies. So what about you? What's a story that's always caught your attention?
I mean you it's hard because like I think different stories hit you differently at different points in your life, you know? I honestly think that's one of the reasons why the Bible can be so life-giving is because, you experience it differently as you grow. So stories oftentimes that, you read sometimes as a kid or hear about as a kid don't mean anything. And then like as an adult, then they mean so much to you. And it's a toss-up. It's really a toss-up because, I really, really, really want to go with my gut and just say Horse and His Boy from the Narnia stories.
Yeah.
Just because as a kid it meant nothing to me, and it means so much to me now. But if I were to rate it on just masterful storytelling and all like the things that I've learned and all the like literary criticisms and things, it wouldn't be at the top, but it's just like me personally. I feel like that story in particular has more. It's the one that most people don't really, I feel like, jive with the most when they read the Chronicles of Narnia.
Right.
It's funny, and there's so much in it that's really well hidden. Just really well thought through in terms of depression, mental illness. There's a lot there that's really under the surface to it, and I don't know. It's just one of those tales that you really don't know what's there until you really start looking for it, and what those emotions feel like already. And then
so you have to live a little.
You have to have lived to really enjoy it, And I don't know if I've come across a story like that before, where I don't know if I've ever experienced a story where I've read it and been like, oh, that was a cool story, and then come back to it 20 years later and read it and have been in tears, it's like one of those things where, and to be fair, like, I don't know if I've read many tales where I've experienced them as a kid and then experienced them as an adult, and that's happened. So, my pool of stories that's happened with is very small, but still, I'd say that one probably more than most. It was just the sheer jump from, oh yeah, this is a story about someone that like is never in Narnia and is just trying to send a message and warn the people of Narnia that an attack is imminent. To, oh, this is a story about like how to handle not being the hero and how to handle not being the how to handle a life in which you're always like treated not well, and I don't know. It's just
so you like it. You think it's a good story because it has layers to it?
Yeah. It's like whatever your personal life is, you put that into the story, and it speaks to you in some way because of that, and there's just so many quirky scenes. Like, it has a total like twin plot,
right?
Where it's like two people are
right.
The twins.
I remember that.
Yeah, and like twin plots are fun, where it's just like you trick people because you both look the same, and I don't know. There's just there's an innocence to it as well that I still to this day think that Avarice, one of the main characters in the story, she's like one of the best written characters that Lewis ever wrote, and she, I think, ends up becoming re-envisioned Until We Have Faces, and one of the characters Until We Have Faces acts a lot like Avarice. And Aravis, not Avarice. That's different. But yeah, no, there's a lot of good in that story, so I'll go with that one for now. Yeah.
So it sounds like you're saying you like it because it has layers to it, and like there's connections and details that you can learn later, and
yeah,
it's more than just surface level stuff.
Yeah, it's way more. Yeah, and I kind of like how well hidden it is. I think that's what I appreciate more than anything, is just how well hidden it is. Because you really could read it as a kid and not. Right. It's just a story about a horse and his boy. But yeah, no.
I like it. Oh, that's great. All right, we got a few minutes. We had been doing 2 icebreakers.
So I asked one. Do you have one apart from the?
It's a simple one.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe not though. Maybe hard to answer.
But
a simple one that I've been thinking again a lot about.
Mm-hmm.
It used to be a really simple answer for me. Now it's a lot more complicated. Do you have a favorite Bible verse? And if so, what is it?
It's usually what I'm reading at the moment.
Right.
I know that sounds like a cheesy answer or whatever, but no, it's usually there's too much in the Bible for you to all take it in at once, and verses change with you as you grow, and so a verse that might have meant something to you at some point in your life because you're going through this doesn't mean something anymore because you're not going through that or
right.
whatnot. So I I would say in my season of life right now, um, I would say that verse from Thessalonians that I mentioned earlier has become sort of deeply meaningful to me in a lot of ways, where um, he asks all of the Thessalonians, make it your ambition to lead a quiet life, to mind your own business, and to work with your hands, just as he told you. That verse has often been the thing that has gotten me through sometimes when I wanted recognition for something, and wanted like more affirmation of what I'm doing, and wanted like praise. And that verse has been sort of something that's kept me working forward in my life, where I don't need that praise. And I like, it's a call to like keep your head down and just keep doing what you're doing, and don't try and glory, like, it's for his glory, it's not for your glory. And don't like necessarily seek that. So that's probably been the verse that's stuck out to me the most in this part of my life, has been 2020 is very much making everybody kind of live that life, right? Where you're having to live a kind of quieter life through Zoom and different things, and you're not getting as noticed, you're not in as much social situations, and you're just you are in a sense having to live this quietness that wasn't happening before. And I don't know, that to me has really affected me and has given me a bit of hope that like this is something that God wants.
That's a good one. I like that one a lot. That was my phone background for a while too. Because I think so much of our Christian environment and our culture, maybe that both of us were raised in, especially in our youth groups, we're all about like, you got to change the world for Jesus. You got to save as many lost souls out there as you need to.
Yeah.
You got to make a difference. You got to this, that, and the other. And I just like the contrast that verse says, that just says, make it your ambition to lead a quiet life, work with your hands, just kind of be like a faithful person who doesn't seek a lot of praise. And if you do that, you're still being faithful to God. You don't have to like change the world and save 1 million souls and all this kind of stuff. So I think it's a good balance to the same thing you were talking about. I feel it a lot of times too, which is just that sort of desire to be recognized for the things that you do and different things like that. So I like that. I think it's a good one.
What about you? I'm curious.
Well, like I was saying, it used to be easy. It's a little more complicated now because I'm a bigger fan these days of not just taking individual verses and reading them, but like taking whole sections.
Yeah, that's good. I was kind of surprised you asked me the question.
But I've kind of flip-flopped on it. So like I used to be like I was the Bible memory verse guy in my youth group. Like all the kids in youth group used to like talk about how I had so many Bible verses memorized. So they would always come and ask me, what's a good Bible verse for this thing? And I would like spout off a few or something like that. The thing that, and then it changed where I was like, no, I don't want to just take individual verses out of context. I want to understand them as a whole. But I think recently I've started to understand the value of like poetry as just like poetic phrases and just small little things, as opposed to prose, like as opposed to like a big speech with lots of logic and reason and argument. Sometimes I think it's more moving for human beings to just have like a phrase, a beautiful phrase of just a few words put together beautifully that can really give you meaning and that you can infuse with more meaning. I think that's one of the cool things about poetry is the words end up being vague enough that you can kind of take them a lot of different directions.
Yeah.
And as I've started to understand the value of that, I think I've started to understand that a lot of the Bible fits more into the poetry category than it does the prose category. And so because of that, I'm kind of coming back around on it. I like having individual Bible verses. So
Definitely, if you're reading Proverbs, it's intended.
Yeah. And so it's funny. One of my recent favorites, one that I think about a lot, is from Proverbs. Interestingly enough, now that you bring that up. But it just simply says, man plans his ways, but the Lord directs his steps. And some people really hate that verse because it has like all these like, you don't have any free will, God's going to decide everything in the end anyways, connotations to it. A lot of Calvinist friends I have love that verse. Man plans his ways, but the Lord directs his steps. But I think the reason it's been encouraging to me is I've made a lot of really horrible decisions in my life. And I am comforted and encouraged by the fact that as much planning and machinations and like thoughts that I have about my ideas and my goals and my things that I'm wanting to do, God is still the one that's directing how things are going to go. And I can, that should be comforting to me, that God is the one that's still in control in the end. And it has been comforting to me, kind of in a, you can lean on it and trust in it kind of way, which is that the Lord directs your steps. So, yeah, that's my most recent favorite. But yeah, I don't know. Like, I could go. We could go on.
Yeah, no. I totally get it. I think I'm curious. Do you see that as like do you tend to? I've asked this question a lot of times with different people in book clubs and things like that. Do you tend to think that when someone is like did a good deed for you, that they did a good deed for you, or do you tend to think that it was God through them that did a good deed? You know?
I don't know. It's in a weird way both. I personally, especially recently, am trying to really, really make sure that I recognize the people that are purpose for me.
Yeah.
So I always try to acknowledge the person, like thank them for it.
Yeah.
But I definitely still end up going home and thanking God for that thing that happened, that person that helped me out, that good thing that happened, all that kind of stuff. So
yeah.
And I think that's what that verse is kind of saying. In
that's
a
what I'm
weird way.
saying. Yeah.
There's a confluence. There's a both and aspect to man's going to plan his ways. Man's going to decide what he's going to do. The Lord's going to direct his steps, and they can kind of both go hand in hand. And personally, for me, it's just been comforting and encouraging to understand that you have this like safeguard that you can hold on to, which is that God is directing things.
Yeah, because I think personally for me, I end up emphasizing the latter half of that verse more than the first half of that verse. And so I tend to not give people as much credit for the good deeds and tend to give God way much more credit, which, I mean, can be good in some regards, but it means that oftentimes I don't think about the fact that they spent that much time, you know, or effort to do that thing or whatever. And so I was just curious because that verse seems to, like you were saying, straddle that line very well in between those two. But
yeah, it's one of those difficult areas that you find a lot in the Bible, which is where things that seem to be on like opposite ends, that seem to be like going against one another, are both in the Bible. I think predestination and like, does God direct things or do humans have free will, is one of those ideas where depending on which end you end up on, you can find a lot of Bible verses that say one, and you can find a lot of Bible verses that kind of imply the other.
Which is kind of like the topic we're talking about today, right? Where we've got one that we're talking about where
it's one of those contradictions that seems to show up where it seems like the Bible is saying two different things, or like sort of speaking out of two sides of its mouth, you know. And I do think that's something that comes up a lot, and that's something that we really want to not shy away from, I guess. That's what I've noticed in my own experience lots of times. People have a tendency to emphasize one or the other, whichever side they like more. Yeah. So if you like the human free will side, you're going to talk about how man plans his ways. If you like the God is in control side, you're going to talk about how the Lord directs his steps. And there is a value, I think, sometimes in learning to sit in that tension and understanding both. And so today, specifically, we wanted to talk about a topic that we've been referencing a little bit in our whole Advent series, that is referenced in the prophetic passage that we have been referencing a lot in this Advent series, which is in Malachi chapter 4. At the very end of the book of Malachi, there is a prophecy that foretells the coming of Elijah again, the prophet Elijah. He's going to return again. He's going to prepare a way for the Messiah. And one of the signs Malachi says to look for, so that you know that this is coming and this is about to happen, is the fact that parents' hearts will be turned towards their children, and children's hearts will be turned towards their parents. And personally, both me and you, Noah, we've been talking about this for a few weeks. That passage connected with us a lot.
Yeah. Because
this year has been a year that's been so divisive for so many people. And because we end up focusing a lot on intergenerational things and conflicts between generations, we have noticed that this year has been one of those years where parents and children seem to have been more divided than ever.
Yeah.
I've seen it with politics. I've seen it with COVID. I've seen it with all of the various things that are going on. You see these like hard lines being drawn often along generational lines, and you see the children ending up on one side, the parents ending up on the other. And personally, we both have a desire to really see reconciliation between generations and a lot of different sides on those issues, because we do think it's a sign of the kingdom of God. You know, that prophet Malachi says, when you see this, that's when you know the kingdom's at hand, or whatever. And so we think it's important to emphasize that. But so that's what we've been preaching about. It's been like 2 Sundays now where I basically, first I talked about just that general reconciliation of families. And then last Sunday, I talked specifically about John the Baptist and him being that Elijah character that is foretold in that prophecy. And it's really cool when the angel is like telling John the Baptist's dad about John the Baptist. He references that same passage in Malachi where he talks about the parents' hearts being turned towards their children. So it's all those layers of connection. It's really cool. So it's cool, and it's easy to preach on these days. You know, it's like one of those that'll preach kind of situations. Yeah. Let's bring the generations together. But it was funny. You were talking to me a few days ago that you had a similar hang up about that passage that I actually did when I was preparing both of those sermons, which is, how do we square that promise of generations being brought together with some of Jesus's own specific words about how he is going to divide? You know, Jesus kind of references specifically the ways that he has come to bring division. Yeah. So
why don't you bring up one of the passages where Jesus seems to be anti-Malachi 4?
Yeah. Well, one of the sections where he really seems to be acknowledging the fact that he is going to bring some level of division. And it is one of those things where it does seem like he's saying, like you said, it's very kind of anti Malachi 4. It seems like he's actually saying the opposite of what Malachi says. So I thought I had it pulled up. Sorry, give me 1 second. I gotta find it real quick.
Oh no, you're good. The interesting thing I've found about having Jesus come on the scene is oftentimes he does and says things that are very different from even what the Old Testament prophetic books thought and said. And I think one of the things that you do have to really like boil down on is squaring what he says in some passages And it can be difficult sometimes because he doesn't always. I feel like sometimes we have this view that Jesus like says things where he he was just like a really nice guy and a really nice teacher and just did all these nice things. But when you start looking at a lot of the things that he said specifically, sometimes they're really hard to deal with. So that's kind of what we're hoping to do today is really look at this verse in particular and really address this one. So you got it?
Yeah, it was one of those things where it was one of my very first lessons and like sermons that I actually taught as a student here at Mid-South where we're broadcasting from. Was basically on why Jesus wasn't as nice as a lot of people think he was, and why he was actually somebody that ended up turning people away and angering people more than I think a lot of us realized. No, I don't have it pulled up yet. It's here it is. Sorry. Only took like 10 minutes to find. But here we get a good idea of exactly what I'm talking about. It's in Luke chapter 12, starting in verse 49. And Jesus says, I have come to bring fire on earth, and how I wish it was already kindled. But I have a baptism to undergo, and what constraint I am under until it is completed. Do you think that I came to bring peace on earth? No, I tell you, but division. From now on, there will be 5 in one family, divided against each other, 3 against 2, and 2 against 3. They will be divided, father against son, and son against father, mother against daughter, and daughter against mother, mother-in-law against daughter-in-law, and daughter-in-law against mother-in-law.
So now we have a problem.
It certainly seems like it. And it was funny because, like you mentioned, both me and you immediately thought of this passage when we read the Malachi one. When we were reading the Malachi one, we were like, wait. So Malachi says that this age of the Messiah is going to bring parents and children together.
Mm-hmm.
But Jesus himself says, no, I'm going to divide parents and children. And it's one of those where it's like to explain what this means, we could go on for like we could really go into detail.
I think what we figured out was there's multiple ways to explain it.
Yeah.
Right.
And I will say we both kind of think in this way that we're kind of we are still kind of speculating,
a little bit.
But both of us
have
thought about this, but we're not like hardcore, like for sure this is exactly how to explain the seeming contradiction between those two different things. But we talked about it a little bit, and we do have some ways that we think you can kind of bring those two together.
Did you want to start with the near and far fulfillment one?
Yeah, why don't you explain that a little bit?
Okay. So one of the most traditional ways that oftentimes Old Testament prophecies get explained in the Bible is what's called the near and far fulfillment, in which oftentimes they'll say that certain passages in the Old Testament have a fulfillment in Jesus's time, have like, so like Malachi 4 does mention like Messiah coming and sort of, I haven't read Malachi 4 recently, so correct me if I'm wrong on anything I'm about to say here, but I'm under the impression that Malachi 4 is a very messianic prophecy. And so there's a lot in there that is prophesying Jesus's coming, right? And
well, and I would say specifically, Malachi 4 is most directly a end of the exile prophecy. So it's more of a like the exile will be over, the kingdom will be reestablished. But that reestablishment of the kingdom is something that really closely connects with the Messiah in a lot of things. And like I said, in the Gospels, when John the Baptist or various prophets that come, John the Baptist as the prophet that comes to foretell the coming of the Messiah, when he's referenced, they directly connect it to Malachi. So,
that makes sense.
Yeah, there's definitely messianic overtones to it.
Yeah. So it's prophesying that the kingdom will come, and a lot of interpreters will say, okay, this happened in the time of Christ. The kingdom did come. He died on the cross. He's bringing the kingdom of heaven in, and all of this is happening. But certain elements of the prophecy, they'll say, are waiting for an eventual coming, and usually they relate this to the second coming of Christ, when that will happen. So they'll say, okay, Jesus did come and did bring the kingdom, and that was the near fulfillment, was that. And then the far fulfillment will be something that happens way on later when Jesus comes back, the second coming. That's when children and parents will be fully united, and they'll be able to enjoy community with one another in a wholesome way again. And so what Jesus is saying when he comes on is he's saying, I am the near fulfillment of this prophecy, and I'm not fulfilling everything in this prophecy. I'm only fulfilling certain aspects of it that relate to the kingdom coming, and you'll have to wait until my second coming to enjoy that benefit of children and mothers being.
Yeah.
You had certain problems with that viewpoint.
Well, it's something that gets applied to a lot of prophecy in general. You know, all of the prophecy in the Old Testament, and even some of the prophecies that come up in the New Testament. It kind of has this like partial versus like full fulfillment idea to it too, where a lot of people will talk about certain parts of that have like a near fulfillment, as in like in just a few years this stuff is going to come true, but then other parts of it have like a far fulfillment, as in like centuries or decades or millennia later is when these things are finally going to be fulfilled. And so a lot of people treat almost all the prophecies in the Bible that way. So there's like a near fulfillment, which is within a few years, and then a far fulfillment, which is like way in the future. And so usually when you look up this contradiction of like, well, I don't know, it doesn't seem like children and parents are united yet. A simple explanation that a lot of people will give is like, well, Jesus is talking about how in the here and now, in that day and age that he is in, there's going to be some division between parents. But in the final age to come, in the end of it all, in heaven, that's when parents will be reconciled with their children, and when everything that Malachi promised, it'll have a far fulfillment,
right,
at the very like far end of time,
basically in heaven.
Yeah. My issue with that is just that, you know, we could do a whole nother episode specifically on this.
Yeah,
so
the 5-minute version.
We'll try to just even do just like the 5-second version of my main issue with that, which is just that that concept is very arbitrary, and it kind of opens it up to a lot of people just saying like, oh, well, this isn't really this is talking about the future, whereas this was talking about in the immediate, and people like it to pick and choose which aspects of the prophecies.
So you kind of get to read the Bible and get to decide what got fulfilled in 70 AD and what got fulfilled or what gets to be fulfilled later on, and it can be kind of this arbitrary thing where the reader gets to decide.
It feels that way a lot to me. You know, it feels like where I'll be talking to people and they will just be, and any contradiction or anything that I bring up that kind of would be a contradiction to the thing that they're arguing, they'll just be like, oh, well, you know, that's just because it's not going to be true till later, till sometime later.
So you see it as kind of an easy out.
It's an easy out. It's a cop out. And in general, I find this with a lot of things. A lot of like simple, easy answers to these difficult passages that seem to contradict each other are helpful for a time, and they're easy and they're convenient and they seem like they're really true. But in the long run, you're going to eventually find that they're not going to be satisfying enough for you. They're not going to be robust. They're not really going to help get you through. And there is I think to get the really robust stuff that really helps you truly live your life the way you're supposed to, you need to sit in the tension sometimes a little longer, and don't just cop out for the easy answer that seems to make a lot of it make sense. And so that's something I push a lot of people towards. There are a ton of easy answers out there. There's a really cool and not cool website. I kind of like it. I kind of don't. that's just called gotquestions.org.
Yeah.
You know,
I've been to it several times.
And usually if you Google any of these Bible contradictions or any of these difficulties
that's the answer you'll get.
The like top Google thing will always be this gotquestions.org website that's like, here's how we explain how those two go together. And, you know, the church has been around for 2,000 plus years at this point. So we've had a lot of time to come up with nice, clean, easy answers to a lot of these questions. And I find that there are certain people that can just be like, yeah, no, that makes sense. That's a good answer. I'm good with that. But I do really think that to get those nice and easy answers sometimes forces you to ignore other bigger aspects of what's actually being said. And I just think, like I said, I just think you're eventually going to come to a point to where those easy answers don't satisfy. So you need deeper, more robust answers.
So if the near and far fulfillment doesn't do it for you, what is another way that we can look at it?
Well, there's a couple of connections that we made when we were talking about it earlier. I think one that is important to make so that we can understand both what Malachi is talking about and what Jesus is talking about is this trend that you see in all of the Old Testament.
Yeah.
Which is this sort of cyclical, generational pattern that keeps coming up over and over and over again in the history of Israel specifically. And it's this pattern where God will do this amazing, miraculous thing. He will free the people from their Egyptian slavery as through parting the Red Sea and all this crazy miraculous stuff, or he will provide a victory to Gideon and his really small army versus this massive army, or he will give David victory over Goliath with just one well placed slingshot. All these awesome miracles, all these awesome things, these awesome ways God helps his people and God is faithful. So you'll have one of those sort of situations. And then basically within one generation, almost every single time, the children of those people, the children of those people who saw the miracle will rebel. It will often talk about how they will just forget God. They will forget that any of that even happened, and they will just start acting like God's never done anything for them. You see it with the Israelites where they just immediately start saying, we should just go back to slavery. Why can't we just go back to how things were before? You see it in the time of Gideon with just like the people being like, there's no miracles. Where are these miracles that you told us about? God doesn't really do anything. God doesn't really care for us. Gideon, in fact, is a part of in the book of Judges. And the book of Judges is, I think, the book that most cements this pattern of God doing things for his people and then like a generation later the people immediately forgetting about it.
Yeah.
You see that cycle very clearly in the book of Judges. And then you see it by the time of the kings and David and Solomon and all of them later where you have almost immediately after you'll have like a faithful king, and then immediately after his like kids will be like horrible, unfaithful to God, idolaters, and all this kind of stuff. So it's this cycle that comes up over and over again. And I think that at least part of what's being referenced, both with the words Jesus is using and what Malachi is using, is it's referencing that trend of
the children
rebelling against their parents. And part of what I think the like awesome promise of that prophecy in Malachi is that that God will make himself known in such a way that the children are going to have to come back to their parents and be like, you know what, you're right. God is the kind of person that you said he was going to be, and we've rebelled, and we're sorry that we're rebellious children, and we have come back to seeing things the way you see them.
So it sounds like you see that prophecy as talking about the trend of Israel having a generation and following a generation that's always falling further and further away from God because their children are always rebelling against their parents. And so Malachi, in essence, is saying there will be a day where this doesn't happen anymore, where children will follow their parents and they will grow and they will become mature and they will learn with their parents, right? So how does that if that's the view you take, then how does that coincide with Jesus's words then for you? You know?
Yeah. Well, I think that that's a part of the promise of Malachi in that particular passage does have a sort of final judgment day aspect to it, because
it does say the sun will burn away the enemy, right?
Yeah, because a few verses before that, it basically says the evil people are going to get what's due to them.
Yeah.
Like bad people aren't going to keep getting away with the bad things that they have done. So, that does kind of have a certain far fulfillment thing, like we were talking about. That is implied in that kind of Malachi passage. But the reason I bring up that trend you see kind of with Israel and with the children and with their parents is that I do think, especially Malachi, the work that John the Baptist did, I think we have a tendency to read those passages and apply them just to everybody, all people everywhere. And a lot of those passages, I think, are specifically talking about Israel, the people of Israel specifically.
Okay.
And part of the parents and the children that I think is being referenced there is the Israelite children and the Israelite parents will be reconciled to each other in a certain sense with the coming of the Messiah. What Jesus is referencing is the way, I think, partly that he himself is controversial to the world, period. He even references it in another verse where he says that the world is not going to like you because you are my followers. He tells the disciples, just be ready for the fact that the world itself is the current way that the world is, the current structure of things, the current way that things are going to be set up against you in some way or another. And so by just being a Jesus follower, you are setting yourself up for the fact that there is going to be some level of disagreement and division. And I think part of what he's saying is that there are going to be certain people, even within families, that are going to say, I would rather be on the world side. And there's going to be certain people that are going to try to be on the Messiah side. And those usual strong units, especially in the ancient Jewish times where families were super close together, usually those families that are super close together, the message of Jesus is so counter to the message of the world that it's even going to split usually close family units apart.
Yeah, so that sounds like two different views. Like the first view you were talking about was maybe Malachi's talking about the prophecy to Israel, and that Jesus is talking about his Christian family. And so the Christian family is going to have division because, people that become Christians in a family and people that are not Christians in a family, they're going to have division between one another, right? And that'll turn mother against daughter and all that. But Israel itself, the people of Israel, will still grow closer to one another as a result. So that's the first view you mentioned. But the other view I think I would agree with more is the view you were saying where it does seem like Jesus's view is when Malachi is being fulfilled, it's being fulfilled in his own family, right? Like in the family of the church, right? Mm-hmm. And so the church and their individual family, if you had an entire family that was all Christians, for instance, they would have hopefully that Malachi fulfillment happening in their lives in that time. But, if outside of the family of God, Jesus's actions and his ministry will bring destruction and death, right?
And division.
And division, right? Yeah, exactly. And so it seems as if that's not coming true when you're faced against like someone that isn't a Christian or someone that's not, a family that's half Christian, half not Christian. That, seems to be Jesus's statement that I am going to bring a sword into this. I'm going to make people have to choose, between me and family, even. And so that does seem to be a part of it, but there also seems to be a part of it in which if all of the family were to choose him, then there does seem to be this Malachi 4 eventual fulfillment happening in that family. Do you think that is fair or?
Yeah, I think that's like a good just general concept that we see a lot in the Bible, which is that to really take advantage of the promises that Jesus is acknowledging, you have to be a part of the kingdom of God, the kingdom of heaven, the kingdom of Jesus, a follower of Jesus. They're not just like general promises, but they are promises for people who are citizens of the kingdom specifically.
Yeah.
And I do think that is a good way to look at it. There's a particular example of this that I think about all the time when it comes to there's a promise in Romans specifically that talks about the purpose of suffering, and it says that your suffering is going to produce perseverance. Your perseverance is going to produce proven character. Your proven character is going to produce hope. And it's a hope that's never going to be put to shame. A lot of Christians have read that passage and been like, okay, so suffering always has a purpose. God has a purpose in your suffering. You don't suffer pointlessly. He's trying to test you, produce perseverance. He's leading somewhere with your suffering, which I think is a good application of what that passage is saying. It's saying God has a purpose for your suffering. It's not just pointless suffering. The problem is that people have then started to take that passage and apply it to everything. And so this term that I hear all the time is everything happens for a reason. God has a reason you're going through everything. And it's something that Christians use all the time. So any sort of suffering that anybody is going through, whether they are a Christian or not, people will be like, oh, God does everything for a reason. There's a reason for this. There's a reason for your suffering. It's not just pointless suffering. And my big thing is I don't know that that's actually ever promised. In fact, I think if you are not a part of the kingdom, there's a lot of pointless suffering. I think the promise is for people that are part of the kingdom, God's going to use that suffering for his purposes. But if you're just a person in the world, you're going to go through a lot of pointless suffering. And I think that I think that's pretty defensible that as an idea that a lot of people can say, yeah, I've definitely experienced that. I've experienced a lot of suffering in my life that is just pointless suffering that doesn't seem to have a purpose. I think a lot of people can say that they have experienced that. And so that's why I hate whenever people are like, God does everything for a reason. Everything happens for a reason. Because I'm like, no, some things just happen because the world is broken and things are bad.
Yeah.
Whereas the specific promise is that if you're a Christian, the awesome thing is that God is saying you're going to go through that suffering just like everybody else is going to. But I'm going to use it for something. It's not just going to be pointless. I'm going to be able to use it for something so that you will see a purpose through that suffering. And I think that's a really cool promise for Christians, but I wouldn't apply it across the board. And so to bring it full circle, I think that's part of the position me and you came to, that unification of children to their parents is a promise
specifically
for the members of the kingdom of God. The division that Jesus is talking about between children and their parents is an example of just what happens in the world when Jesus is introduced. When you are given the option to follow Jesus or not, there's going to be divisions, even amongst family members specifically. You're going to see a lot of those divisions.
And I will say, like, I've seen families that are entirely Christian, and I would qualify them all as defined by their Christian faith, and not just like churchianity Christians that just go to church and then don't do anything else, and those families, they have something to them that does not necessarily show itself in other families, and I see that as the Malachi 4 kind of being fulfilled in that there's sort of a you were talking about this with me, not in family but specifically, but in a church community, when people make the decision to put themselves last and put others first, which is a distinctly Christian ideal. There's a community that's formed as a result of that, that really defies the normal expectation, right? And really defies the normal way that community functions. Most communities function for the individual receiving many things from the group, and the individual is very focused on how am I satisfied, right? So you think about it in terms of, okay, I'm in this family. How is my mother and my father and my siblings? How are they being good to me?
What am I going to get?
What am I going to get out of this family? Are they harming me or are they helping me? And you think in terms of me and how I am involved in this, right? And I think the Christian message is that that's not the mentality you have. You have a mentality in which you ask, how do I help my mother? How do I help my father? How do I help my siblings? How am I in their lives? Not necessarily, asking the question as frequently, at least, how are they helping me? And I think that's what creates this Malachi pattern, this prophecy being fulfilled is when you live out that life in which sometimes even your own political beliefs are less important than ministering to your family member, and I think that's the takeaway that you can have is being selfless even in that, and still standing for what you believe at times, but having enough of a selfless attitude that I don't have to win this argument right here. I don't have to win that. I think that's really what's being prophesied and what I see happen a lot of times in really wholesome Christian families. So have you seen
when it's
that?
done well? That's definitely, I think you catch a glimpse of that like almost utopian vision that Malachi is laying out of families being brought together. You catch glimpses of it, and both me and you are very committed to this idea, which is that the way you catch glimpses of it is when you kind of follow the example of Jesus. You learn to put your own preferences and your own desires aside, your own comfort aside sometimes, and you learn to think of other people and put other people first. And I love that both of these passages seem to, or specifically this Malachi passage, seems to imply that an awesome way to see that in action is in families specifically. And so, in general, that's just something we've been pushing for in this Advent season specifically that we're going through. It's a time of kind of somber reflection a little bit, a time to kind of look forward to and dream about Christmas.
Yeah.
But to sit in the reality of where things are right now. And I think both of us are just, it's kind of this one note that we just keep hitting on over these last few weeks, but it's really important to both of us, which is just, let's try to consider how we can think of others. I would say to all of the other children and younger people who may be in our boat, really think about how can you serve your parents? How can you think of them? How can you try to understand them? How can you connect with them? Rather than where I think a lot of us end up, which is like, how can I correct my parents on where they're wrong and all this kind of stuff. And then I think I would say the other way around too, for any parents out there who are listening, rather than trying to, in the same way, kind of correct your kids where they're wrong and fix their theology or their politics or whatever, really try to consider what are the ways that I can and serve them and put their needs above my own. And I think if we do that, we really will see the fulfillment of that prophecy in our own lives. And that's something that I'm really looking forward to. So you got anything else, or you think we're good to go?
No, I think we're good. Thank you so much, everybody, for tuning in and everything.
Absolutely.
And I'm glad to be back after a week off.
For sure. For sure. And feel free to, tune in this Sunday, 7:00. We're going to be continuing our Advent series. I'm particularly excited about just getting a chance to step away from the crazy hustle and bustle of Christmas. And I think the weather we started talking about, it's cold, it's a little dreary, but I think it's appropriate for Advent. It's a nice calm coziness to it. And it's just going to get us prepped for Christmas. And I'm hoping this Christmas will be one of the best ones we've had in a long time, despite however 2020 may have turned out. So tune in this Sunday and you can find out a little bit more about that. We'll see y'all later.
Thanks, guys.